Interview with the Vampire, Season 2, Episode 7, I Could Not Prevent It. I like this one so much better than episode 6 from a sheer perspective of entertainment, but from a motivation perspective, I think this one might be the most muddy of all the episodes we've got so far. The premise of I Could Not Prevent It is that we, the viewers, are watching a mock trial for Claudia, Madeline, and Louis. Optically, this is so much fun. I love seeing the actors like parade around and ham it up. I love a little bit of that meta, behind the scenes commentary about what you do when someone goes off script or when someone forgets a line. But premise and theme wise, I found it pretty confusing and frustrating. The show's conceit since season 1 was that this is like the real, true, nothing held back kind of interview moment. Watching the play within a play, I have to wonder if the play is false, if the play is Lestat's perspective. Like, what is this play's purpose and how seriously are we supposed to take it? Additionally, the title of this episode, I Could Not Prevent It, along with the repetitive refrain from Armand, just made me furious. In the book, when Louis learns about Claudia's death, Armand pulls him away and just keeps repeating, I could not prevent it. I could not prevent it. And at this juncture in the story, readers are kind of led to believe that he probably couldn't have. And even with us sort of thinking that perhaps he really couldn't prevent this situation and perhaps it's something that Louis should forgive, Louis personally does not accept the I could not prevent it narrative. But oh, you could have prevented it, I said softly. You know full well that you could have. You were the leader. You were the only one who knew the limits of your own power. They didn't know. They didn't understand. Your understanding surpassed theirs. It was your own sense of self you would not violate. Your own precious concept of truth. I understand you perfectly. I see you in the reflection of myself. That passivity in me has been the core of it all. The real evil. The weakness. The refusal to compromise a fractured and stupid morality. That awful pride. For that, I let myself become the thing I am when I knew it was wrong. For that, I let Claudia become the vampire she became when I knew it was wrong. For that, I stood by and let her kill Lestat when I knew that was wrong, the very thing that was her undoing. I lifted not a finger to prevent it. And Madeline, I let her come to that, when I should never have made her a creature like ourselves. I knew that was wrong. Well, I tell you, I am no longer that passive, weak creature that is spun evil from evil till the web is vast and thick, while I remain its stultified victim. It's over. I know now what I must do, and I warn you for whatever mercy you've shown me in digging me out of that grave tonight where I would have died. Do not seek your shelter in the Théâtre des Vampires again. Do not go near it. The one and only time he's truly angry in the entire book. Now later in the book, we come to find out that Armand actually expertly orchestrated Claudia's demise, so his insistence on I could not prevent it takes on another meaning. Mostly that he's lying, but you could also choose to interpret that line as Armand saying he had to take that step so that Louis would be his immortal companion, and that he'd literally tried everything else before that. He first tried to scare Claudia off, then he had Louis make Madeline so Claudia would leave with another companion. And when Louis finally comes to Armand and he's still not leaving Claudia, that's when Armand released Lestat and set everything in motion to get Claudia killed. He literally did everything he could to prevent that. And that makes this line iconic and come with a lot of baggage if you're going to direct quote it from the book, as well as like a lot of meaning at different times in the story and potential for interpretation. So there's a lot riding on the show's ability to incorporate this line in a meaningful way with layers. And as it stands, I kind of think its use in the show is pretty insulting if we don't get further context in this last episode. Madeline and Claudia have already left Paris, so if he and Louis book it out of Dodge too, then there's no one for the Vampire Coven to control. Everyone gets to live. This like active participation role for Armand is just baffling. In the books, we get a very clear reason why Armand does this. It's selfish, it's messed up. If he'd waited a little longer, things probably probably would have worked out and he wouldn't have needed to do it. But at least he has a reasoning, a thought process, a plan going on. I do not understand what Armand gets by sacrificing Claudia and Louis up to the coven. This seems like antithetical to what Armand in the show wants. And additionally, Louis' lack of reaction to this line when it sparks one of the greatest, most angry moments of the book just floored me. Like, it's not just the line that is working here, it's Louis' response that makes this an iconic moment in the book. It just felt very flat. I enjoyed Armand's delivery. I enjoyed how hurt and like remorseful he looked when he spoke the line and how they made this line honest. But it's not going anywhere or doing anything. There's no reason for him to do what he did. So it just all feels like a play. And my major complaint about this season so far is that it does things for spectacle and because they look cool instead of really exploring themes or character motivations. And I don't know if that's just like a symptom of adapting something to a visual medium or if the showrunners decided they didn't care about those elements, but to a certain degree it makes this feel less gothic and more melodrama, and you know I'm here for all the gothy goodness. But moving into those characters, Daniel exists here, but he's not really making any character growth or big moves, so we're gonna skip him. Armand is quiet for most of this interview, letting Louis talk and work his way through what I suppose is the most traumatic incident in his vampiric life. A random note I had is that when Louis chooses to have blood out of a bowl, Armand eats with him, and I thought that was really weird considering just 2 episodes we learned Armand doesn't have to eat that often, and when he does eat, he prefers to hunt his food. So like, was that really just for convenience so Louis and Daniel could have a moment alone? Meanwhile, past Armand is locked in the first row of the theater, forced to watch the mock trial of his lover. And he's kind of sad about it, so like, what does that tell us about Armand? I don't really know. It might just be a place they shoved Armand so he could be present, but at the same time, we didn't have to focus on him. I kind of wonder why he decided to use his telepathy instead of his firepower. And none of these are new or interesting gripes. I've been confused by who Armand is and his motivations this whole season, and I've also been kind of confused and turned off by like the vampires' powers, their consistency of use, and how strong they are. Moving into that vampire coven, they are just having a great old time in this episode, though they are unnerved by Lestat's inconsistencies and his off-script moments. I do wonder if the coven actually called Lestat or if that was a conceit of the play. In the book, Lestat's the one with the initiative. He comes to Paris not for Louis but for Armand. He's hoping a little bit of that extra old blood will help get him feeling like normal. Armand doesn't help him. Instead, he traps Lestat and eventually releases him to the coven when he realizes he has to kill Claudia. You could view the vampire coven in the books as a tool lacking agency. They reflect the age and cynicism which cannot comprehend the depth of possibilities, fastidious, sophisticated indulgence, and the parody of the miraculous decadence whose last refuge is self-ridicule, a mannered helplessness. So if they did call Lestat over here, I guess good job giving the coven agency. But if they had the diaries that are literally a signed confession and chronicle of crimes, I don't know why they needed Lestat to come across the ocean, except that we love Sam Raimi and it was fun to see him on stage. I don't know. Overall, I think it's a little weird to give agency and more depth to a vampire coven that's about to get destroyed and at the same time take it away from Lestat, who's a major player in the Vampire Chronicles. I know they really wanted to do this play within a play, but I do think it's a little weird that the Vampire Coven wants to hold this trial in front of humanity. Moving on to Louis, he really struggles to retell what happened that night, and this is perhaps the most emotional we've seen him throughout the entire interview till now. It's interesting that he can feel so emotional about Claudia's end when he doesn't feel emotional about other slights and wrongs leading up to it that gave her like a less than ideal life. And it's also interesting for him to feel like this hurt and emotion, but to be with Armand, who basically facilitated the whole thing. You would think there'd be a breakdown in their relationship or like a major working through that we'd have to do something with that we're not really doing. Even if they had quote unquote like worked through it before, you would think like dredging up this memory and talking about it again would create another round of animosity animosity. 1950 is not that far in the rearview mirror. So like, it seems even in the grand scheme of time and vampires forgiving stuff, it would be too early. The how and why of Claudia's turning seems to really matter. And I found this clip odd because he's the one who told us how Claudia was turned in season 1. I guess it was through Claudia's journaling. Why is Lestat's remembering of it more real and authentic than Claudia's? Also, I would challenge, like, why does it even matter? The facts of the matter remain the same if you strip the emotion away. Both Lestat and Louis agree that Claudia makes a vicious, fierce vampire. She thrives. She spends 7 years on her own, is just fine. And I thought generally the Coven saw her perspective as a vicious killer in the night. This turnaround where now the Coven is trying to frame her as like a child incapable of self-sufficiency is quite odd. Between Claudia and Louis, Claudia's not just the better vampire, she's also the more self-sufficient of them. So then like choosing Lestat's less charitable reinterpretation of what happened feels like some kind of punishment, like Louis wants to go with this version to make himself look worse in the book. And if Louis is writing this book to reveal vampires and to stop the Great Conversion and save humanity or whatever, you'd think he'd want to see himself as positively portrayed as possible because people have to see him as trustworthy. Being a little bit more charitable to yourself, making yourself look sad, guilty, upset, all things humanity can relate to, but not like out of control, seems like it would be to the benefit of your overall larger book publishing goals. Don't understand why he doesn't use the fire gift. This is kind of the problem about like powering up these vampires. Like I ask all the time why the telepathy isn't working. Now I'm asking about the fire thing. Like if you hadn't introduced these gifts or if you hadn't made Louis able to master them, then you'd have a much easier time with like what's happening. And on stage, I really bought the toxic romance of Louis and Lestat. It's probably the best portrayal in the show to date. The combination of longing and hatred in those eyes, the wanting to be close to him and burning up this relationship between the two of them where they might be able to finish each other's sentences and know their likes and dislikes and like adequately needle or comfort each other at any given moment. It just so happens at this given moment, Lestat is trying to burn Louis alive. He's still like falling back in love with Lestat just by being close to him. For me, it was a little reverse taste of what we got in season 1, episode 7, where Louis was like sort of seducing Lestat and like falling back in love with him all the time, working towards his death. Lestat's here, they're sort of falling back in love, being in the same place at the same time, and all the time this time Lestat is the one working for Louis' demise. Moving into Claudia. I love her in all versions and adaptations of who and what she is, and I think they did a great job sending her off in the show. She's angry and defiant to the end, which I felt was pretty true to her character. She's brave and forceful. I love that she gets that moment with Madeleine where Madeleine chooses her. I love that she says to Lestat, "This wasn't about me. It was never about me." That beautiful repetition of the line Lestat says in season 1, episodes 5 or 6 to her. Further acknowledging that she's sort of been like a tool in their ongoing war, more than she's been an individual representative of herself. She's being punished to punish Louis. It has nothing to do with her wrongs or rights. And I also love how this aged up Claudia gets a chance to protect Madeleine when they're facing the sun. And that's like a wonderful reverse of what Madeleine does in the books. Encompasses the new relationship Claudia and Madeleine have. It's implied that their immortal companionship includes a loving relationship. To that end, they hold each other, and when things get tough, because Claudia is the older, more powerful, more experienced vampire, she tries to shield Madeleine as long as possible. And talking about Madeleine, she left the show with a little bit of a whimper, huh? I understand this episode was Claudia's goodbye. The focus was on her. Giving Madeleine like much to do really would have just taken away from Claudia's last screen time. And where Madeleine does not survive, we don't need any more development from her. I didn't love this characterization of her just sitting dazed and out of it either. A little bit, I'm still dissatisfied with the Madeleine representation we've gotten throughout the series tenure. I get it, but I'm also a little ambivalent to how we like portrayed Madeleine and Claudia's relationship relationship as a whole, because there's so much relationship between Louis and all of his male lovers. I guess he's like the main character, so great, but we don't get a lot of female characters at all. And when we had an opportunity for like a lesbian romance, we just sort of decided not to depict it or like to truncate it in favor of other elements. And I don't really feel like that was 100% fair or like even necessarily the right decision. And lastly, let's talk about Lestat. I don't necessarily expect him to storm out and chase after Louis and Claudia, but I would expect him to contact the solicitor and go back to living a lavish lifestyle. We did get a lot of potential lore drops, always assuming that the play is actually true or holding elements of truth. First of all, it looks like we're not gonna get to have Lestat's mom, Gabrielle, in this version of the series, and I'm kind of disappointed because she was an incredibly intriguing character. In the books, Lestat turns his mother, Gabrielle, when she visits Paris, and he finds out that she's like dying of consumption. The two of them do live happily together for a while, but eventually Gabrielle wants to like go out and live on her own. She's sort of beginning to understand that like the laws of humanity and her place as a woman are no longer holding her back, and she can like go live in the wilds if she wants to, or she can live as a man if she wants to, or she can do any number of things. Personally, I've always loved this self-discovery element, the way she takes like assumptions and stereotypes about herself and kind of twists and turns them. And her desire at the end for solitude and for nature more than any more humanity is one that I felt like was quite relatable, set her apart from other vampires. I'm also pretty dissatisfied with the truncated version we get of Nicky's arc. I realize he's dead and he's not coming back, so we really shouldn't be wasting time. But here's the thing, the story that Lestat tells in the play doesn't line up with the story Armand told us, and it also doesn't really line up with the book. So it just leaves me like with a lot of empty holes and unsatisfied just generally. I thought it was telling that the human who tried to impose some kind of homophobic something on Lestat immediately makes him snap, go put him in his place. Because it does show that sometimes Lestat does like feel the weight of prejudice or oppression put on him, but when he gets even like the slightest kernel of pushback, he's very thin-skinned and he's quick to shut it down. Which, given he spent all of season 1 palling around with Louis and Claudia, it sort of shows me that he didn't truly understand the sort of prejudice or discrimination they were experiencing, that he had a low capacity to empathize with them. He has always been able to shut down anyone trying to look down upon him. So he has never been the person without power, and he doesn't really understand that predicament. I do have a note here asking, does Lestat care about these vampire laws? He was really petty about the whole idea there might be vampire laws when he first met Armand in the Satanic Coven. Even though he helped Armand like reforge some sort of companionship among vampires, that doesn't mean he was about these laws. Like, he doesn't care about revealing himself to humans at all. It's interesting to me that he takes the law against turning children so seriously. Does Lestat believe the story as he's telling it? Like, is this his perspective? Or is this him rewriting history to put him in the most favorable light? Certainly, the fight between him and Louis is pretty much the same, except when we watched that fight in season 1, we got it from Claudia's perspective, and here in season 2, we're getting it from Lestat's perspective, so we're getting like a little bit extra needling from Louis, we're getting some quiet moments, the two of them were actually still fighting and arguing, and we're getting Lestat's feelings about like the being thrown across walls and punching and stuff. And Lestat still threw the first shove and or punched, so it is a little bit weird that when they're fighting in earnest, Lestat is like, I don't want to hurt you, Louis, let's stop. He does allow himself to get provoked into something that is disproportionate with what Louis said to him, if Louis said those words at all. Like, I just wonder what the purpose of these scenes are in the larger context of the show. I don't feel like anything that Louis does justifies Lestat's level of reaction. I have always felt a certain level of empathy for him for those 7 years of loneliness. Louis is consistently unconsciously or consciously preying on that weakness and fear of his. But Lestat is the main antagonist and abuser in the relationship. Even if both of them are doing wrongs, Louis needs protection from Lestat. Lestat does not need protection from Louis. Lestat can walk away from this relationship, but Louis is incapable of walking away from Lestat without like significant intervention. The genuine apology Lestat gives on stage is the closest he's come to like starting to make amends. And part of what makes that work for me, besides the fact he feels very like remorseful, he seems to really understand what he did wrong, is because he is there to get Louis killed. He doesn't expect anything from this apology. All of his previous apologies in New Orleans is him trying to worm his way back into Louis's life. But here, there's nothing for Lestat to gain from Louis. So like him admitting this thing doesn't help him in any way, shape, or form. Can literally grant him nothing. But he still gives it to Louis. Additionally, it's been like a bunch of extra years since that event happened. So there's like some time to kind of soften the edges and for both of them to like more fully process what happened. And in that way, this is like a little bit of a glimmer of what I love about Book Lestat, because he's like an anti-hero, right? He's very impulsive. He does things that self-sabotage all the time. And him coming to Paris to get Louis killed only to give the most heartfelt and authentic apology and show that he really understands the wrong he did all those years ago is like perfectly Lestat. So moving into specific scenes, the fact that Armand has a playbill and a script from this one day only play is disturbing. Why did he keep this? And also the fact that he had his hands on a script sort of implies to me that he was a lot more involved in this play than we might have been led to believe by him, like, quote unquote, leaving the coven. Claudia's turning, always interesting to get another perspective on a scene you got earlier in a season. I don't 100% understand or necessarily agree with it, but it is very interesting to watch. And the starving to death scene, this is kind of weird to me, both in show and in book. So tackling the book first, vampires can't starve to death. They might go mad from lack of blood until they get a minute to like refresh and sort of revive, but they are always alive. So like all those coffin bricked up people in the theater could all come back. But now if we go into show lore, it's kind of weird to me that they included Lestat going underground for 30 years and then said that a vampire could starve to death. Because it seems like if you bury yourself into the earth, you can stay like dormant for as long as you want as a vampire and then like pop back up and be just fine. I don't understand why the coffin would be any different. Moving into those themes. Memory is a monster. We forget. It doesn't. This one's diving heavily into that thematic resonance where we're getting multiple perspectives, we're getting a vampire troupe that's intentionally warping the perceptions or like little elements of what happened to suit their own gains. And that's kind of like a fun meta commentary on the recording of history in general. You know, history is written by the victors or whatever. So people always record themselves like in the most righteous and noble way. Or that two different people might come away from the same event with very different narratives. All of that is explored a little bit in this episode if you want to think about it that way. I do think the way the Louis Lestat relationship is mentioned here might be the most interesting of these elements, because Louis gives us in the entire season 1 how he was seduced by Lestat and seduced by the darkness and sort of like helpless to his sheer charisma. And Lestat seems to be claiming the same thing about how he was drawn to Louis. And while Lestat is like a more powerful vampire who's like used to getting what he wants, and he definitely is the more manipulative of the two of them, I can see a world where he was just fully obsessed with Louis and would do anything he could to like sort of like obtain him. When he says that Louis made a poor vampire and he was kind of failing as a vampire, it's kind of like Lestat's like shaken awake come to Jesus moment where he realizes what he has done to Louis and that in some ways turning him into a vampire has like ruined him and killed some of the things he most loved and admired about the man. I don't think Lestat would describe it that way, but that epiphany moment that Lestat has where he realizes even though he's made Louis a vampire and made him immortal, he still might not ever really have that ineffable something he wanted and that drew him to Louis. The who am I supposed to love line, we get a very solid conclusion on Claudia's arc. She loves Madeline, Madeline loves her, and they both get that companionship and acceptance before their death. The question's a lot more up in the air with Louis. Claudia's gone. Armand has betrayed him, as has Lestat. Does he go to either of these two old lovers? What does his life with them look like going forward? What would reconciliation or catharsis look like? We know he's with Armand. We know Lestat is still alive and out there in the world. Does he get a final face-off with Lestat before he and Armand ride off into the sunset? And will we ever get evidence of Armand and Louis hashing out all the issues that must have arisen from this one incident? And then lastly, this is not a life. That's because you took my life. I feel like Madeleine embodies this best when she's given the option of life with the Coven or death with Claudia. There's like a couple things going on there because she's not human anymore. So like she's choosing Louis and Claudia, who are the people who took her life, both her human life and now her immortality. And she's doing this because life with the Coven would not be a life at all. And I think that's going to be everything I have to say about Interview with a Vampire Season 2, Episode 7, I Could Not Prevent It. But talk to me in those comments down below. What was your favorite moment in this episode? If you've come this far into the video and have nothing else to say, leave me a bat emoji in those comments down below. And as always, keep reading.